Chosen one, welcome, radiant ones. You didn't just stumble here. You were summoned. Because only those who carry something the world can't replicate, something the dark can't purchase, are brave enough to stand in this light. Look around you. You are not ordinary. You are not forgotten. You are evidence that even in the midst of chaos, brilliance survives. You've felt it, haven't you? The pressure, the whispers, the battles no one else seems to see. That's because you're not just walking through life, you're shifting it. Your very existence disrupts everything built on lies. That's why they talk. That's why they gather. That's why they try so hard to make you doubt yourself, because even they can feel it. What you carry cannot be bought, borrowed, or broken. You are here because you refuse to shrink. You are here because you chose to wake up in a city designed to keep you asleep. You are here because heaven saw you worthy of the fight. So lift your head, straighten your crown. You are not crazy. You are chosen. You are not weak. You are wired for this. And everything that rose up to destroy you is about to witness the reason you survived. Let's begin. Looking for purpose and peace? Hit subscribe and start the journey. There's a quiet strength that rattles the plans of those who thought they had you cornered. Without lifting a hand, without even turning to look, you disrupted their schemes just by continuing forward, anchored and luminous. The irony is that while you were simply unfolding into what was already written for you, they mistook your stillness for weakness, and their frenzy became their undoing. In their desperation to rewrite your path, they bartered away their own steadiness, slicing pieces off their integrity as if it were scrap paper. Every whispered plot, every secret gathering, every alliance made behind curtains only carved deeper cracks into their own foundations. They believed they could trade malice for destiny, that with enough cunning and collusion, they could sever what had been planted within you. But they never grasped that what you carry is not a trophy to be stolen or a title to be seized. It is rooted beyond reach, immune to bargaining, immune to sabotage. What unsettled them was not anything they could hold or imitate. It was the unseen shelter around you, the unshakable access they could neither unlock nor destroy. And so they burned themselves on the very fire they tried to smother. As you were being sculpted in silence, they were unraveling in noise, caught in their own web of envy. Now the tide has turned, and their machinations echo back to them, no longer silent, but loud and unavoidable. What they sowed in shadows blooms now as consequence in broad daylight, and what they wagered to strip you of your light has left them standing empty-handed, paying a cost they never expected, a cost far heavier than they ever imagined. Step beyond the screen. Join and help light the way for others. Some forces became so fixated on capturing what already blooms effortlessly in you that they lost themselves chasing shadows. They burrowed into strange practices and secret rites, not in search of wisdom, but to replicate what was already coursing through your veins without effort. What baffled them was how you could quiet storms just by being present, how your resolve lit up rooms where fear once sat, how your calm refused to crack when confusion suffocated everyone else. But instead of understanding, they attempted shortcuts. Instead of tending to their own wounds, they tried to hijack your source. They gathered objects and symbols, recited lines in dim corners, performed strange ceremonies in hope of fabricating what flows naturally in your breath. They tracked your steps, studied your rhythms, memorized your choices. Yet every attempt to extract your essence dissolved in their hands. Because what pulses through you isn't stitched together by human hands. It's bestowed, not built. Their efforts to forge what wasn't meant for them only deepened the void they tried to fill. When imitations fell flat, their envy sharpened. They turned to coercion, thinking louder force would unlock what was never theirs to touch. But power rooted in what they ignored cannot be summoned. It only grows stronger the more they deny it. If your heart overflows with divine love, now is the moment to let it shine. Click the super thank you button on YouTube and give $50 or more to help carry God's light to others. Your gift will bless not only your life, but countless others. You are part of His sacred plan. Your kindness may be the answer to someone's prayer. Share your blessings and honor His kingdom. May His grace guide you always. Now they're cornered by the very energies they awakened. What they unleashed in arrogance has circled back. unraveling their plans and scattering what they thought they controlled. The fallout lingers in their lives as fractured sleep, restless minds, and mounting loss. There was never a need for you to shout, to pretend, to grasp at illusions. Your quiet alignment was enough to leave them undone. While they clawed at illusions of authority, you stood undisturbed, carrying what they would have traded everything for. And the truth stands clear now. No performance can forge what is already written into your being. There are those who treated your life as if it were a limitless well, drawing from it recklessly, convinced they'd never face the consequences. Whenever their plans faltered, whenever emptiness crept into their homes, whenever decay touched their circles, they found a way to attach it to your name. They spoke of you in twisted whispers, placed your image in spaces of blame, convinced that draining your spirit would restore what they'd lost. But what they never understood was that the core of your strength reaches beyond anything they could tamper with. Their constant taking, their unseen demands, their quiet assaults have now accumulated into a weight they can no longer carry. Without your consent, they turned you into their fixation, a false source to tap into when their own lights dimmed. They mistook your resilience for endless supply. They assumed the radiance around you could be leached indefinitely. So they kept pulling, siphoning, accusing, projecting, blind to the toll it was exacting on them. Yet what they failed to notice was how every silent strike against you was counted. What they crafted in secrecy is now echoing back. Their own world is crumbling, not because you retaliated, but because they overdrew what was never theirs to claim. The collapse is loud now, impossible to hide, the reckoning of their own making. While they flounder, grasping at the remains, it's clear they mistook your endurance for permission. In truth, the quiet you kept was gathering evidence all along. Now the weight of their misdeeds arrives like stones dropping into their hands, and no one comes to lift it. Even those who conspired with them are sinking alongside them, bound to the same fate. All along, they believed you were the obstacle, when you were simply the one protected. And now, their unchecked greed has become the pit they can't climb out of. Step beyond the screen. Join and help light the way for others. Some alliances are born not from shared vision, but from shared resentment. Fragile bonds soldered together by nothing more than a common disdain for what they cannot embody. They mistook their collective discontent for strength, crafting a counterfeit brotherhood around the hollow thrill of tearing another down. It wasn't unity. It was a masquerade of wounded pride and restless envy, stitched into something that looked solid but cracked beneath the slightest strain. Every glance in your direction became their fuel, not because you inflicted harm, but because your presence exposed what they could never touch. They nursed their bitterness like a ritual meal, retelling lies until the fiction felt like history, applauding one another's malice as though it were bravery. Yet nothing built on contempt survives intact. It always carries its own expiration, waiting to shatter from within. Now that moment has come. Their pretend camaraderie is splintering under its own weight. What was once whispered as loyalty is unraveling as betrayal. Secrets they shared are now weapons. Confidants have become accusers, each one scrambling to distance themselves from the others. The very thing that held them together, their obsession with seeing you fall, disintegrated the second you stepped beyond their reach and rose anyway. Without you as a target, the glue dissolved, and the illusion of allegiance melted into chaos. What's left now is only suspicion and broken trust. No true connection, no peace, no future. That's the curse of building a house out of spite. It collapses in silence, leaving only dust where walls once stood. And the most remarkable part? The collapse required nothing from you. The quiet force around you dismantled it all on its own, leaving behind only the ruins of a false empire. Some became so desperate to tip the scales against you that they reached for forces far beyond their comprehension, stumbling into realms they couldn't command. In their fixation to bend your journey to their will, they tampered with currents older and deeper than their shallow understanding. Behind closed doors and veiled words, they invoked strange powers, convinced they could bend them like tools. But their recklessness invited something entirely different. In trying to topple you, they didn't summon harm. They awakened justice. They never grasped that some souls move under laws no human hand can rewrite. That unseen boundaries rise like invisible walls around certain lives, untouchable by those who seek to undermine them. The moment they trespassed, they triggered the watchfulness of something far larger than themselves. If your heart overflows with divine love, now is the moment to let it shine. Click the super thank you button on YouTube and give $50 or more to help carry God's light to others. Your gift will bless not only your life, but countless others. You are part of His sacred plan. Your kindness may be the answer to someone's prayer. Share your blessings and honor His kingdom. May His grace guide you always. Instead of unleashing destruction on your path, they sounded an alarm in the unseen, and the response was swift, quiet, inevitable. What arrived wasn't chaos, but consequence. Not a roar, but a reckoning. And it manifested everywhere, in restless nights, in unraveling plans, in sudden betrayals from the very allies they trusted, in closed doors where once there was favor. The very forces they tried to harness turned their backs, leaving them in confusion and disarray. Because true accountability does not shout. It seeps in through the cracks, showing itself in silence and setbacks, in doors that no longer open, in whispers of collapse they can't escape. The more they pushed, the more they bound themselves to their own undoing. While they believed they were summoning shadows against you, they unknowingly called down light. And light, when it arrives to judge, leaves nothing hidden. What chases them now isn't darkness at all. It's the quiet certainty of consequence, walking closer each day, beyond their ability to control or charm. Some people became so desperate to escape the weight of their own choices that they tried to offload it onto someone they thought could bear it for them. When the walls began closing in and misfortune clung to them like a second skin, they refused to face the truth and went searching for someone to blame. And in their minds, you seemed like the perfect vessel, steady, unblemished, resilient enough to absorb what they couldn't carry themselves. So they heaped their failures on your name, speaking of you as though you were the reason their ground kept crumbling. They whispered fabrications into quiet corners, crafted stories heavy with accusation, and scattered blame like salt into soil, hoping it would take root elsewhere. Even in silence, they tried to shift their storms into your skies, as though your light could somehow swallow their shadows. But what they didn't foresee was that your spirit was already brimming with purpose, impermeable, untouchable, a container not meant to hold their ruin. Instead of absorbing what they hurled, you deflected it without even trying. Instead of shattering under their weight, you became a reflection they couldn't ignore. Now the illusion has collapsed. The more they tried to bury their chaos under your feet, the more it resurfaced at their own doorstep. Those around them have begun to see clearly. The stories they spun are unraveling thread by thread, and every falsehood is folding in on itself. What they sought to avoid has only doubled back, faster and heavier, as if time itself demanded repayment. Their reputations erode with every exposed secret. Their alliances crumble like brittle stone, and the silence they once mistook for victory has become deafening, a quiet witness to their undoing. The very reckoning they hoped to delay has arrived, precise and undeniable, carrying every unspoken confession in its hands. Some tried so hard to orchestrate your downfall that they failed to notice they were crafting the stage for their own. Without realizing, they mistook your quiet existence for a snare and stepped right into their own unraveling. You weren't scheming. You weren't baiting. You were simply living, becoming, embodying what they could never fabricate. Yet your presence lit up what they worked so hard to bury. It stripped away their disguises without effort, forcing their true motives into the open. They thought they were setting snares for you, weaving confusion into your path, planting obstacles, and waiting to watch you stumble. But every move they made tightened their own noose. Without any help from you, the masks they wore began to crack, and the words they wielded became admissions. What they spoke in secrecy slipped out in daylight. The envy they swallowed leaked into every gesture. The lies they fed others eventually betrayed them, louder than anything you could have said. The irony was inescapable. Every plan they hatched to tarnish you became evidence of their own collapse. Every arrow they loosed curved back toward their hands. What they tried to weaponize against you instead illuminated everything about them that they wanted to hide. And so you stood, steady, untouched, while they stumbled over the very traps they thought they'd crafted for you. Their own ambition exposed them, and the curtain rose on a scene they'd never rehearsed, their truth on display for all to witness. You never needed to retaliate or dirty your hands. The quiet strength around you did the work. What they failed to understand is that your light wasn't just protection, it was revelation. And now, as the room watches, their schemes collapse under their own weight, and you remain, elevated above the ruins. Some believed they could rewrite your destiny by binding themselves to hidden pacts, etching their names into dark contracts they didn't fully understand. In secret corners, they struck deals with unseen powers, believing that these forbidden agreements would grant them sway over your life. They gave offerings, spoke words they didn't comprehend, and tethered themselves to forces that promised dominance in exchange for loyalty. What they never grasped was that what shields you cannot be overwritten by rituals or bargains. Long before they whispered their first oath, a promise had already been inscribed into your very being, a promise they couldn't interpret or undo. Your essence carries more than protection. It carries a heritage older than their ambitions, written into the fabric of who you are. They thought hatred could overpower inheritance, but they were contending with something they couldn't reach. You came into this world clothed not just in resilience, but in a lineage of quiet authority, a current running through you that their most elaborate ceremonies couldn't counterfeit. Every time they moved to strike, you became sharper. Every time they predicted your fall, you rose higher, untouched and somehow stronger, because the force around you isn't reactive, it's foundational, unshakable, and beyond the reach of their grasp. And now the weight of their own choices is pressing back against them. The forces they aligned with have turned indifferent or hostile, because their agreements failed to deliver. Their own shadows have come to collect, and the silence on the other side of their invocations grows heavier. You never had to step into the fight. The very blood that flows through you fought on your behalf. What they bargained for now demands payment from them, leaving them restless and cornered. And only now do they realize too late that nothing forged in darkness can dismantle what was already etched in light. Some assumed that gathering more hands would tip the balance in their favor, that sheer numbers could silence the one they opposed. They rallied acquaintances, whispered to strangers, stitched alliances from every corner, certain that enough voices raised together would finally drown yours. They organized quietly, convinced that strategy and collective disdain were enough to overcome. They met in hidden spaces, traded plans, and measured your silence as weakness. But what they failed to account for was the force standing behind you. Alone, you carried something more potent than their entire assembly could comprehend. They never understood how someone with no visible defense could weather everything they unleashed. They watched you closely, waiting for cracks to show. But instead of collapsing, you only became more steady. Instead of dimming, you grew brighter, shaking the very ground they stood on. Because what they didn't know is that your authority doesn't depend on approval. It isn't something voted into being or earned through consensus. It was bestowed beyond their jurisdiction. Every scheme they devised fell apart in their own hands. Their words lost weight, and the momentum of their group unraveled under the quiet gravity you carried. You weren't just unshaken. You were the very disruption to their design, the kind of presence that disarms entire networks without lifting a finger. Their crowded circle has begun to fracture. Whispers have turned into blame. Faces that once stood united now glare at each other, confused as to why nothing worked. They miscalculated because they saw only one standing figure against many, and missed the infinite strength at your back. What they thought was fragility was unyielding power. What they thought was solitude was sovereignty. And so while they still scramble for explanation, you remain calm, elevated, and unbothered, because their arithmetic never accounted for the immeasurable force already moving through you. Some believed their charade could endure forever, layering charm over malice, wearing kindness like a costume while scripting storms behind the curtain. They rehearsed their roles for years, smiling where they should have seethed, performing loyalty while sowing confusion, even cloaking themselves in pious language to keep suspicion at bay. They fooled many, enough that even those closest to you wondered if you were mistaken about them. They posed as healers, helpers, protectors, whatever face served their agenda. But time doesn't bargain with masks, it peels them away. And truth doesn't always arrive loudly, but when it does, nothing false survives its heat. Now their disguises are collapsing, first in quiet cracks, then in spectacular ruin. What they whispered into shadows is being carried into the light by forces beyond their control. People who once championed them are waking up confused, seeing what was always there but hidden. Dreams, insights, and strange clarity are sweeping through those around them, connecting whispers to deeds, and showing names alongside actions. Their image, once carefully constructed, is faltering under the scrutiny of something far greater than gossip, something undeniable. You didn't have to pull their mask off. The weight of truth did it for you. You didn't have to orchestrate vengeance. The unseen has already spoken, and now they are unraveling in front of the same crowd they tried to impress. The charisma no longer works. Their charm shatters mid-sentence, and even those they rallied to oppose you are now stepping back, watching with unease. What once appeared to be unity now looks like a scattered assembly clinging to a crumbling narrative. It isn't hearsay, it's evidence, revealed in real time. Those who once silenced others are being named aloud. Those who hid behind borrowed identities are being recognized for who they truly are. The masks no longer fit, and each attempt to put them back on only draws more attention to the fractures underneath. And the most striking part? You never shouted. You simply stood still, and time itself finished the work, because what is authentic needs no defense, and what is false cannot endure under the weight of its own deception. Some pointed at you and laughed, mocking your vision, dismissing your choices, and ridiculing your path. They called you strange, impractical, too intense, eager to make a spectacle out of what they could never understand. They paraded their disdain openly, trying to paint you as someone to pity or avoid, a punchline in conversations meant to belittle. But behind those jeers, something else was growing. In the silence of their own rooms, they studied you carefully, watching the way you spoke, tracing the way you moved, replaying your words as though they held a secret they couldn't decipher. They borrowed your ideas, mimicked your style, and copied your essence in subtle ways, all while pretending not to notice you at all. It was never about hatred, it was about unease. You reminded them of what authenticity looks like, and that reflection unsettled them more than they could admit. That's why they scoffed so loudly, hoping noise would drown out the admiration they were unwilling to express. They hoped that dismissing you publicly would quiet the quiet envy gnawing at them. But things have shifted. The same light they tried to mock has now exposed their borrowed fragments for what they are. People are starting to notice the resemblance, the imitation, the inconsistency. The ridicule they launched at you now circles back, because the very person they tried to tear down has become the standard they secretly tried to emulate. The awkward truth is visible now. Their gestures, their language, their ideas all bear the fingerprints of the one they belittled. You never needed to correct them, never needed to justify yourself. What shields you keeps record of every word spoken and every truth denied. And now their whispers of admiration have turned into a kind of public discomfort, as those around them begin to question their integrity. They put so much effort into pulling you down, only to discover they couldn't stand beside what you carry. Their borrowed glow has dimmed beside your unwavering flame, and nothing they can fabricate will ever feel real enough to replace what you already are. Some believe that if they moved quietly enough, they could rewrite the story without being noticed, that their whispers, schemes, and strikes would vanish into the void, unseen and unchallenged. Every insult they muttered, every trap they set, every shadow they sent your way, they carried out as though no one was paying attention. But the reality was never about human witnesses. Every gesture was already accounted for, inscribed in places they could never reach. What they didn't realize was that you weren't simply spared. The evidence was collected. Every secret intention was filed where it mattered most. The harm they plotted never dissolved. It was traced and preserved, tied to their own hands. While you moved forward, they were silently branded with the truth of what they'd done. Each act became a mark that couldn't be scrubbed away, not stamped with your name, but with their own actions, their own choices. You weren't merely a victim of their cruelty. You were a sacred thread they carelessly tugged at, and what they thought was mischief was actually a transgression against something untouchable. The reckoning didn't come as fire raining from the sky. It came as unraveling from within, the slow erosion of calm, of connection, of control. The very forces they once manipulated turned indifferent, even hostile, because the balance had already shifted. And the most humbling truth of all, you never shouted back. You never stooped to their level. The quiet way you continued walking carried more weight than any confrontation. Because what protected you was never only about keeping you safe. It was also about recording the story they thought they'd buried. Now the price is theirs to carry, and mercy has already walked out the door.